In terms of the biometrics that we collect right now are things like pupil size, which is there's definitely a section where we talk about what we get out of that, but on a very quick level, in the same way that your heart rate goes up when the load on your body goes up, your pupils get larger when the load on your brain goes up. Similarly, we can look at the way your eyes are moving around the screen. And then there's one more aspect to the gaze stats called fixation, which is basically how long you're looking at that current thing. The next set of metrics that we collect on the brain through EEG, EEG is a way of looking at the electricity of the brain through the skull. The challenge is not on all players at the same time. By looking at their brain activity, you can start to understand, okay, who's got resources available, who's having a tough time. And then finally, the more physical type metrics are things related to your body. So there's heart rate, which is, much like during physical exercise, it's going to go up and down. You have skin temperature, basically how hot your skin feels. And at the same time, you have sweat levels. So one of the things that gamers have noticed is that during very intense matches, their hands get sweaty. And it's a thing. There were even controllers with like fans built in that blow air to resolve that problem. But it's a real thing, right? To the point that we built a special controller to deal with that. We can measure that. And what is it that I can do with that information? How do I use my self-knowledge to give me an advantage over competitors who don't have that information about themselves? So we partnered with a university, and they created a project where the data from the esports team would go automatically to the data science group that was working on a project, and they would be able to use that to kind of see what maps were more difficult for the team based on pupil spikes. And that was the methodology that they chose, and it worked out very well. And sure enough, the team had this idea of which maps were better for them and worse for them. Their players struggle more, they tend to lose, whatever. And while they had the in-game stats to prove it, they didn't really have an understanding of what about those maps made it harder. Well, at the end of that project, they could see how much more difficult it was for which players in particular. Let's take a moment talking about the cognitive heart rate, and because I've spent a lot of time looking at it, and so to me, I know what that is, but let me just describe it a little bit. When we talk about the physical heart rate, there's a couple of really common breakpoints we can think of. If we're sitting quietly, maybe our heart rate is like 60, where we're just at rest, there's not a lot of load on our system and so on. And so if we were talking about the journey of someone climbing up a mountain, we could almost kind of tell where they are in the mountain by how high their heart rate is, right? Maybe at the start, it's kind of at the flat part, it's not so bad, and then it kind of keeps climbing up and so on. And so it really kind of gives us a sense of what part of this is the hardest, right? Where is the exertion the biggest, and where is the body using the most resources? And so when we talk about pupil sizes, what's really fascinating about pupils is how responsive they are to load. It's just really incredible. You can have someone just sitting there, and if you were to ask them a question or say something or give them a task, it would immediately go up. And so there's this very clear relationship that says my eyes will really scale linearly with what's going on in my brain. Like, it's a really, really good indicator of my overall activity. And that's super interesting because, like we were talking about earlier, different people find different parts of the game challenging. And that's really cool. But using the load really, in a strange way, gives you a sense of when people are doing a lot of things and when people are not doing a lot of things. And so if the load is high, I'm thinking about things, or I'm very involved in the moment, or it's intense for me in some way, and vice versa. I think in the same way that an athlete can use a detailed understanding of their heart rate to understand themselves, and their coach can understand their training and their performance, by looking at the way your brain responds to the game in particular, and what parts are difficult for you and what parts are easy for you, you can start to think about, how do I use this strategy? Where do I have an advantage over my opponents? What are the situations where maybe I'm at a disadvantage? So it's really coming up with a detailed cognitive understanding the same way that we understand our bodies. The brain really uses two things for fuel to do what it does, which is sugar, glucose, just like our muscles, and oxygen. It needs the ability to use those two things to do its computation. So there are going to be times where our body is kind of in a low energy state. We're just relaxing, we're playing a game, it's no big deal, but suddenly something really intense happens. And now our brain wants all the glucose, all the oxygen that it can get to try to process that thing and ramp up as quickly as possible. But how good is our body at delivering that? What state is our body in? And I think that this is sort of a really interesting phenomenon that's probably most present in gaming, but I think will show up in any other really intense seated task. But when we're seated, our body is really trying to conserve energy. It's trying to shift into a low power state. And so, people sit down in a lecture at a university, and within a half hour, you see half the class asleep. And I don't mean anything bad about it, but you could just see, right? Like, they came to learn, and their body went to power save, and that's it. We're done. We're snoozing through that lecture. And I don't think that's a good thing. So you look at it, people like to take a Red Bull right before a game. Now I'm going to put a bunch of sugar in my system, and now it's going to be elevated. And so, and maybe I'll even get a heart rate boost from the caffeine. And so now I've got kind of a couple of things going on, and my performance is going to be better. That's one way of managing yourself. But another way is sort of coming to understand those things about yourself and say, okay, my body is a system. It's my lungs provide the oxygen to my brain, and my liver decides how much energy we're going to be releasing in the form of sugar based on what's going on. How can I use that knowledge to put myself in a state where I'm going to perform really well when it matters? I was watching your interview with Fudge on YouTube, and I thought it was fascinating to hear him talking about these concepts, because we've discussed it at length. So the two things that I want to say that Fudge talked about was the concept of physical priming. So on game days, he likes to work out in the morning. And that might seem strange to people because on game day, you can kind of do whatever you want on a team. You guys might not know that, but it's sort of like you're under strict regime when you're training. But on game day, it's cool. You could do whatever makes you play right. It's fine. You get a little extra slack. And so if you wanted to not work out, he certainly could, right? That would be the day where he's like, on game days, I don't think so. But it's the opposite. He plays better and he feels better. Well, it turns out this is the exact same thing they discovered in European soccer. Sorry, I'm sure half the audience is offended with each term. The body's ability to provide glucose and oxygen to the brain really matters. And you're fighting this power saving effect where your body wants to just, optimize for the fact that you're sitting still and just take everything lower and lower, and that's not going to leave a lot of resources for your brain. And so having a holistic approach to fitness, periodically raising your activity during the day makes a massive difference for your gaming performance. But if you don't take care of your body, you still don't perform. You still have the laws of physics, even though you're super fit. As a gamer, not only do you need your brain to be right, you need your body to support it. And so having an insight into how your body can fuel your brain and doing the things that make it easier, that reduce the load on your body so that it's got more resources to give to your brain, it's going to help you in game. The way that you get an understanding of, hey, if I cut just a little sleep, it's going to affect me the next day. Like, look at how my metrics are different. My brain doesn't signal the same way. My pupils are a different size because I didn't get enough rest. That really kind of makes that relationship. And there is the sense of, I wouldn't say accountability, but you understand the consequence of what happens. You know, if I eat poorly, don't get water, don't get sleep, I have put a lot of load on my body. The next day, it's just going to have to work through that, right? These are debts that we're paying off, and whatever resources we're using to cover that are not going to go to gaming. And it's just incredible how much better I think people perform when they have that sense of like, I did what I needed to do to come in here ready to go. And that doesn't mean that every game is going to be a win, but I just think that comes through, and that extra self-knowledge and that understanding of your body's ability to fuel the brain and what you're doing in terms of how hard that is, that's wonderful. Gaming is one of the most incredible things that you can do with your time, and that basically it's cognitive exercise. It's a higher level of intensity than anything else you can do in your regular life. And I'm not saying this to be exaggerating. One of the first things we did was put people in a bunch of different tasks. What happens when you're reading an article? What happens when you're looking at YouTube? What happens when you're doing X, Y, Z? And then finally, we tried a bunch of different games. What happens when you play this game or that game or whatever? What I can tell you is gaming is a level of intensity that your brain simply will never reach if you don't game. You learn about yourself, you learn about your body, and you learn how to kind of work with yourself to raise your limits. And I think that's an incredible process, right? It kind of just pushes you forward. And I guess just the number one thing, gaming is really good for your brain, and it's really good for your mind. It expands your ideas of how high your limits are. If you've really never pushed yourself to the max of cognitive performance of what you can do when you and another person are giving it your absolute all, and you're trying as hard as you can to succeed, and it's just the only difference is who does it better, that will raise your mindset. Having that understanding, seeing that evolution, and then hopefully we can provide the metrics to help people understand how they're growing, because that's the part that we can't see, right? With our bodies, we get this immediate feedback. You start doing the right things. Oh my God, I look different. With our brain, it's a little more slow. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed the chat, and I tried to have bullet points ready so that I was not rambling on my answers.
Well played.